I'm Maria Titizian.
And I'm Rubina Margosian, and this is The Week in Review.
Every week, we bring you the stories shaping Armenia and the region.
From politics and policy to social issues and conflict, we break down the news and what it means for you.
This week in the news, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio makes a whirlwind visit to Yerevan. Days later, President Donald Trump publicly endorses Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan in a social media post. Armenia holds its first military parade in a decade, drawing criticism from opposition parties who say the event served as a campaign tool. And Russia ramps up pressure on Armenia, warning of possible economic consequences if Yerevan continues moving closer to the European Union. These stories and more in our weekly roundup of the news.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio made a brief but consequential stop in Yerevan on May 26, meeting Armenian Foreign Minister Arat Mirzoyan at Yerevan's Zvartnots International Airport and overseeing the signing of several agreements aimed at deepening U.S.-Armenia relations. During the roughly one-hour visit, the two sides signed a Charter of Comprehensive Strategic Partnership and an MOU on critical minerals. They also initialed a framework agreement on the Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity trip that would establish a joint U.S.-Armenia development company to oversee the project. The U.S. branch will be wholly owned subsidiary of the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, incorporated in Delaware, and will hold 74% controlling ownership stake, with Armenia holding 26%. After an initial 49-year term, Armenia's stake would rise up to 49%, with the term extension serving as the sole reason for the increase. Agreement explicitly states that Armenia retains full sovereignty, territorial integrity, and jurisdiction over all TRIP project areas, and that Armenian authorities have primacy in all emergency situations in the TRIP implementation areas. Armenia will remain responsible for border control, customs, immigration, and law enforcement, though it agreed to explore a front office, back office model for customs operations at relevant border crossings. Mirzoyan said at a press conference following Rubio's departure that the formal signing of the agreement would occur after the completion of some technical procedures, which he estimated would happen within weeks.
The day after Rubio's visit, Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan offered new details about the proposed trip route. During a campaign event, he said the project would include reopening the railway through Meghri, allowing Azerbaijan to establish a rail connection between Nakhichevan and mainland Azerbaijan, while giving Armenia, for the first time since independence, a direct north-south rail link through Syunik. The MOU on critical minerals aims at expanding cooperation in the extraction, processing, and supply of materials essential for advanced technologies, including AI and high-tech manufacturing. Pashinyan said the agreement would help Armenia better study and develop its mineral resources using modern technologies, because, Rubina, there's a lot of talk that there are minerals that we don't even know about. There's been talk of uranium for decades, I think even during the Soviet era. So, I mean, while there's criticism about this, well, the U.S. is coming in and pouncing and extracting our minerals, I think it's also going to be beneficial for us to know
what we
actually have
and what it's good for,
and what maybe not good for anything. Anyway, meanwhile, the Charter on Comprehensive Strategic Partnership significantly expands the scope of U.S.-Armenia cooperation. The document outlines plans for closer collaboration in areas ranging from defense and military training to civil nuclear energy, semiconductors, and emerging technologies. On defense, it specifically envisions greater access for Armenia to U.S. military equipment and training programs. Rubio's visit came less than 2 weeks before Armenia's June 7 parliamentary elections, as we know, and it prompted criticism from a lot of people in the opposition, arguing that the timing benefited Pashinyan's party. And while Rubio praised Armenia's leadership for pursuing a more independent future, he really stopped short of offering any explicit endorsement ahead of the vote. Well, 2 days later, President Donald Trump did exactly that. He explicitly endorsed Pashinyan in a social media post for the June 7 election, calling him a great friend and leader who is making Armenia strong, wealthy, and very secure. He commended TRIPS, which he said will transform the South Caucasus and help, this is a quote, our wonderful American energy companies gain access from Central Asia all the way to the United States. Pashinyan thanked Trump for that. And of course, the opposition also were saying that, a lot of people are complaining about Russian hybrid operations and influence in Armenia's elections. And this is, a blatant thing. But I think the difference here is that these guys are being very, they're coming out
Open and saying.
open. And the other one sort of
Also, in all the comparable elections, when America endorsed any candidate, they ended
usually
up not
does
winning.
winning.
So,
it's not always a good thing.
meanwhile, Russia continues increasing pressure on Armenia ahead of the elections, and this time it's serious. It's
a
kind
little
of like
bit.
another blatant
Yes.
approach here.
Yes.
Maria Zakharova told RIA Novosti that Moscow has warned Yerevan it could suspend or withdraw preferential trade agreements if Armenia continues pursuing closer integration with the European Union. The warning came in a letter sent on May 25 by Russia's energy minister to Armenia's Ministry of Territorial Administration and Infrastructure. At stake is a 2013 agreement under which Russia supplies Armenia with natural gas, petroleum products, and rough diamonds on preferential terms. The arrangement, which was linked to Armenia's membership to the Eurasian Economic Union, has helped shield the country from higher market prices, particularly for natural gas. If those preferences were revoked, Armenia could face significantly higher energy costs. Armenian officials confirmed receiving the letter from the Russians, but declined to comment on its content. Infrastructure Minister David Khudatian said the government is reviewing the document and will respond if and when necessary.
Well, to continue the trend, meanwhile, Russia imposed a series of trade restrictions on Armenian exports over the past week, targeting mineral water, alcoholic beverages, flowers, and fresh produce. Russia's Consumer Protection Agency has now fully banned the import and sale of Jermuk mineral water, citing elevated levels of some minerals. A partial ban on a specific production batch had already been in place since late April on the same grounds. On the same day, the agricultural watchdog imposed temporary restrictions on Armenian flour imports, and authorities subsequently announced inspections of Armenian fruit and vegetable exporters, alleging widespread violations. From May 30, the import of Armenian tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, herbs, and strawberries will be temporarily suspended. Rubina, you thought also that apricots would be suspended
Because I
too.
kept seeing news and
Yeah.
it turned out to be false
yeah.
news.
Well, it's good because the strawberries are so amazing this year. I'm glad they're not being exported because I keep buying them.
The prices needed to go down.
To go
though.
down, yes. What else is new? The inspection agency cited a pattern of phytosanitary violations and noted that a large volume of produce was being supplied by companies whose ownership structures were unclear and which were allegedly evading quarantine controls. Russian authorities separately suspended the sale of wine and brandy products from 3 Armenian manufacturers for failing to meet requirements. Russia's economy minister said that trade restrictions on Armenian goods would have no meaningful impact on the Russian economy or inflation, describing the affected products as niche items with diversified alternative suppliers. So basically saying, you're the one who's being punished, it's not going to affect us.
They're not going to have Armenian strawberries. It's
There
okay.
you go. We'll have them at inflated prices.
Well, meanwhile, Yerevan sought to reassure the public that relations with Moscow remain manageable. Foreign Minister Arat Mirzoyan said Armenia has no interest in escalating disagreements with Russia and remains committed to resolving outstanding issues through dialogue. He also downplayed recent Russian restrictions on Armenian exports, characterizing them as a recurring issue that arises periodically. On this, he's right, but they have really stepped it up. Well, while he did not dismiss the possibility of political motives, he said any concerns would be addressed through diplomatic channels. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan struck a similar note. He said Armenia's economy is not under threat and expressed confidence that current disagreements with Russia can be resolved through working-level discussions. Pashinyan also noted that he maintains direct and constructive relations with both Russian President Vladimir Putin and Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin. At the same time, Pashinyan reiterated that Armenia has no plans to leave the Eurasian Economic Union. Instead, he argued that membership in the Russian-led bloc continues to serve Armenia's economic interests and provides opportunities to expand trade with other member states, including Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan.
Meanwhile, coming back to Maria Zakharova, who, by the way, is Russia's foreign ministry spokesperson, said that Moscow views Armenia's growing ties with NATO and the EU with concern. Speaking at a briefing, Zakharova said Russia is troubled by Yerevan's alignment with the Euro-Atlantic structures whose principal political orientation, she said, is directed against Moscow. She described the EU as having shifted from an economic bloc into what she called an aggressive militarist formation, increasingly aligned with NATO, and accused Western powers of openly already boasting about pulling Armenia away from Russia. Zakharova acknowledged that Armenians would determine their own country's course, but said Moscow remains interested in, quote, a genuinely sovereign and independent Armenia and has always regarded it as an equal partner. On bilateral relations, she said Armenian officials' assurances of a desire to preserve ties with Russia were contradicted by their actions. She also accused the Armenian government of tolerating a Western-backed campaign to stoke anti-Russian sentiment, including allegations that Moscow is interfering in Armenia's internal affairs or conducting hybrid attacks against the country.
Well, if you say we will raise the price of gas
If
you pursue EU integration, that could be interpreted as direct meddling.
Well, regarding the upcoming parliamentary elections, Zakharova said Armenia informally notified Russia that several of its proposed observers were unwelcome without providing formal explanation. Moscow has requested clarification but received no official response. Zakharova speculated the exclusions may reflect the individual's presence on EU sanctions list, characterizing the move as Yerevan deferring to Brussels. And there's more from Russia. It's a Russia-heavy week.
Russia's Security Council Secretary Sergei Shoigu also weighed in on Armenia-Russia relations this week, defending Moscow's role in regional security and rejecting Armenia's criticism of the Collective Security Treaty Organization. Shoigu stated that Armenia has neither been attacked on its internationally recognized territory nor formally requested CSTO assistance during the conflict with Azerbaijan. Well, Shoigu also argued that Russia has taken significant steps to prevent serious bloodshed between Armenia and Azerbaijan, including deploying peacekeepers, and dismissed accusations that CSTO had failed to act during the crisis. Asked about the future of Russia's military presence in Armenia, Shoigu said Moscow sees no reason to reconsider the status of its military base in Gyumri. The base, he said, operates normally and there are currently no conditions that would warrant its withdrawal.
Prime Minister Pashinyan announced earlier this week that the Akhalkalaki-Kars railway is now open for exports from Armenia and imports into Armenia. Pashinyan described the development as a major event and thanked Turkey and Georgia. He said Armenia currently has rail connections to Russia through Georgia and Azerbaijan and onward to China through Russia and Kazakhstan. He added that Armenia now also has a rail link to the European Union through Georgia and Turkey. Pashinyan said the next steps would be the opening of the Armenia-Turkey and Armenia-Azerbaijan railways, followed by the Armenia-Iran railway via Nakhichevan as part of the TRIP project. Speaking at a rally in Gyumri, Pashinyan also announced plans to renovate the Akhurik railway junction and prepare for the reopening of the Akhurik-Akyaka railway. He did not provide a timeline or specify funding sources. Earlier, Pashinyan said Yerevan had asked Moscow to restore the railway infrastructure in the Akhurik and Yeras sections. Meanwhile, Foreign Minister Ararat Mirzoyan and Minister of Territorial Administration and Infrastructure David Khudadyan said this week that discussions with Russia are still ongoing.
And the most talked about thing this week event, Armenia held its first military parade in a decade on May 28, showcasing newly acquired military equipment in Yerevan's Republic Square, not only Republic Square, all the way on Dikamet and down the road. Well, Prime Minister Pashinyan had announced the event back in March, describing it as less of a military parade and more of a report to the citizens of Armenia. He argued that labeling it a military parade could create the impression of deviating from or even abandoning the peace agenda. May 28 is Republic Day, marking the anniversary of proclamation of Armenia's first republic in 1918. Armenia has previously held military parades exclusively on September 21, which commemorates the independence of Armenia's current Third Republic back in 1991. The last parade was held in 2016 to mark 25 years of independence. The parade featured newly acquired French-made Caesar self-propelled howitzers, Chinese UAVs, Iranian short-range air defense systems, Indian multiple rocket launchers, as well as locally produced UAVs.
Yeah, that was the interesting part, right? As we were watching, and they kept saying Hayre Nagan Ardatruchun, made in Armenia, all those drones. It was pretty impressive.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about it later, but we did publish a Newswatch piece about what was presented and which ones were Armenia made. So that's there on our website. website. Well, the army also unveiled the new coat of arms during the parade, well, the day before. The redesigned emblem predominantly features the outline of Armenia above the national tricolor, an image that has become a central element of the ruling Civil Contract Party's election campaign. The previous shield bearing a cross has been replaced by an 8-pointed Armenian symbol, while the eagle is depicted holding a sword in one claw and a cross in the
And
other.
again, this was another moment of hysterical.
Well,
I mean, I think it's ugly, to be honest, if you want my opinion.
well, it's not uglier than the previous one.
Whatever,
It's like
it's
the
just,
same
yeah.
amount of.
Everyone, the cross has been removed. The cross has been removed.
It's obviously there. It hasn't been removed, so some people still refuse to see it. It's there even
it's
more
interesting,
evidently.
right?
Yeah, like this, like selective
Because
blindness.
the one on the shield before, the old one, the cross looked kind of weird. It really didn't look like a cross. Now this is an actual cross, and somebody was saying to me, "Oh, did you hear? They removed the cross from the shield." And I'm like, guys, I mean, I don't even know what to say.
Well, the Defense Ministry did publish a detailed explanation about
there was a
what
video
has been,
even, right?
yes, a
Yeah,
video,
yeah.
what has been changed and why, and what was wrong. Well, their explanation was quite. I mean, it was good enough for me because all of it made sense why things were done differently this time regarding how the peak of the eagle was closed before, is
Now
not
it's
open, its
open.
body was not complete, it should have been complete, so they've completed the body, including the claws,
Oh my God. Okay.
and kind of like all these laws that symbolically work, and how the Armenian flag was like cut in
Pieces.
now
Now
it's complete,
Yeah.
and all the corrections that made it, they all made sense to me. I'm
Yeah,
just like aesthetically, well, it's not much different.
But the other thing is that, opposition forces in Armenia, were very critical of the parade. They said this was electioneering. It was in the middle of the campaign. Like we said before, it was in September. But the thing that I found really telling was that instead of feeling proud about what was being displayed, they went on the offensive almost. And I remember in 2016 when that military parade happened, I was there. I went to Republic Square, and it was a time that I had issues with the. We have issues with every administration. It's not about the administration. Serge was there, he was gone. Pashinyan's here, he will go. Right? It's about what remains. Right? And so for me, that was really upsetting because I remember the feeling of pride in 2016 as we were being showcased, even things that turned out to be used against us, not weapons, sorry, that came out wrong. The Iskander and all of these things that really didn't work or weren't used during the war. So this has been the conversation this past week.
It's very actually emotional to be there, to see it. And also, as you mentioned, Maria, kind of this calls to boycott, not go, misinformation about roads to Yerevan being closed so that people couldn't come in, to the extent that the Defense Ministry had to comment and say, no, all roads will be open. Even Ruben Vartanian and David Ishkhanian from Baku had made calls to kind of like boycott or not go to a military parade, which really added to this feeling of maybe something should be spared. Maybe if we want might or military ability, maybe the military should be spared this kind of manipulation.
I agree. But it's, we're in a very highly emotional, I would say, state, which has always been our problem. And it's tense, it's polarized. We're, a week out almost from the elections. So emotions are running high and people are saying things they shouldn't say, maybe, or, they're free to say it, obviously. But
also we've been asking for more visibility into what's in the arsenal, what we have. And like we do get a glimpse of what is there, so that itself is very valuable.
And I think that the people who were there, and many thousands and thousands of people who watched it, were very proud that we were able, or at least what we're seeing, to slowly rebuild everything that was decimated during the 2020
it's just
war.
a building block. No one's saying the military is mighty
perfect.
and is going to win every conflict at every situation, and just a little groundbreaking for a new page.
And such, speaking of tense and emotions running high, is our election digest that we've been doing every week, and we have one more week, and then after that we'll see what we'll be talking about.
Well, probably more election digest, post-election digest situation.
The OSCE's election observation mission released its interim assessment of Armenia's June 7 parliamentary elections this week, describing the campaign environment as highly polarized and shaped by debates over the peace process with Azerbaijan, constitutional reform, foreign policy, and tensions between the government and the Armenian church. The report noted that Armenia has implemented several electoral reforms since the last elections, including measures aimed at combating vote buying, the misuse of administrative resources, and voter intimidation, all of which are happening now, but anyway, we'll talk about that in a minute. Most interlocutors expressed confidence in the technical administration of the vote, although concerns remain about polling station accessibility for voters with disabilities. I mean, people with disabilities have accessibility issues in every single day of their life, unfortunately. At the same time, the report described campaign rhetoric as increasingly divisive and warned about the growing role of largely unregulated online campaigning. It also highlighted concerns about campaign finance transparency and allegations of third-party campaigning. On the media landscape or environment, the report characterized Armenia's media landscape as pluralistic but under pressure. Observers cited concerns about political influence, lawsuits against media outlets and bloggers, and perceptions among some stakeholders that the public broadcaster favors the government.
And more in election news, leaked documents published this week by the Dossier Center, an investigative platform linked to former Russian oligarch and outspoken Putin critic Mikhail Khodorkovsky, alleging Russian interference in Armenia's upcoming elections, also implicated the wings of a unity party. According to the leaked documents, party leader Arman Tatoyan's potential candidacy was discussed by the Russian presidential administration in August of 2025, alongside that of businessman Samvel Karapetyan's. The document reportedly shows that Russian political consultants linked to the Kremlin-affiliated political think tank closely connected to the Russian presidential administration developed a strategy to position Tatoyan as a progressive candidate and raise his support to 10% by March of 2026. The strategy included campaign messaging, advertising plans, outreach to Russian-speaking voters and the Armenian diaspora in Russia, polling analysis, and guidance on how Tatoyan should respond to questions about Russia and Armenia's relationship with CSTO. The dossier also obtained campaign budget documents covering January through June of 2026. The plans envisioned spending nearly 927 million drams. This is about $2.6 million on campaign offices, salaries, media work, regional operations, security, polling, and advertising. One document included a line item for a salary fund for Moscow employees, while another indicated that millions of drams and rubles had already been transferred to research and analysis support and pre-campaign advertising. Can I just continue about this advertising? We see a lot of Tatoyan's advertising, but they're working on amounts, not quality, quantity. Like we see
everywhere.
There's almost no creative input, if I may say so.
Well, on that note, the Independent Observer Alliance here in Armenia filed a criminal complaint based on this dossier publication. According to Daniel Ioannisian, the budget estimates for Tatoyan's financing and information on transfers cited in the publication appear credible because they explain the source of the large sum spent, like you said, Rubina, promoting Tatoyan on the wings of Unity brand. Because, he's been very visible,
yes.
Right? He added that 2 weeks earlier, his organization had reported significant spending on promoting the former human rights defender and Wings of Unity while allegedly circumventing party finance transparency rules, and had also found that lease agreements for the party's roughly 30 offices had not been properly registered. Tatoyan responded to this. He said the authorities had launched a large-scale campaign against his party aimed at portraying its activities as Russian-funded. He described the allegations as false. Tatoyan said the dossier center is known for spreading false information. He argued that Ioannisian's complaint relied on criminal code provisions that were irrelevant and absurd and presented the alleged 927 million dirhams in Russian funding as an established established fact. Tatoyan also stated that he was prepared to publish the full list of his party's donors if the ruling Civil Contract Party did the same, arguing that questions should be also asked about civil contracts, financing, and foreign funding. See, this is the problem. When the law is not clear, Rubina, about campaign financing, it has all of these holes. It creates this kinds of problems, right?
Absolutely. And in addition to that, they always find kind of creative ways to
Absolutely. Because,
spend more.
instead of using their brains for something good, they find, loopholes. Anyway, Tatoyan said the campaign against his party, particularly during the election campaign, was a dangerous development, serving the interests of the authorities and aimed at disrupting his party's activities.
Well, we had similar issues with the incumbent last election. Where
Even
they
now,
had,
there were
yes,
some issues, right, about people were on the list as donating, but they didn't know that they had donated.
This was
this
last
has to
time,
be,
yes.
Yeah.
Well, on May 25, Alliance Party leader Dikan Ulikhanian announced that they have officially withdrawn from the race to prevent their potentially wasted votes from being redistributed as bonus to the current administration, thereby aiming to block Pashinyan's path to re-election.
So now we have 18 instead of
They have
19.
And yeah, they had a really kind of pompous idea about how many votes they were going to get because according to our polls, they were like hardly getting any votes.
So Armenia's law enforcement bodies continue to publish new cases involving vote buying and other election-related offenses because we've always said that in recent years, any violations that occur don't occur on election day, right? They occur much before, earlier than that. The investigative committee reported that during April and May, it initiated 79 criminal proceedings related to alleged election-related crimes. Criminal charges have been brought against 38 individuals. Of those, 15 were placed in pretrial detention, 11 under house arrest, 6 under administrative supervision, 1 under educational supervision, they were underage, and 5 were prohibited from leaving their place of residence. The Anti-Corruption Committee reported that between February 7 and May 9 of this year, it initiated 57 criminal proceedings concerning, again, election-related offenses. According to the committee, 86 individuals were detained in 22 of those proceedings, while criminal charges were brought against 94 individuals. Of those charged, 49 were subjected to detention or house arrest, while 38 were subjected to alternative preventive measures. The published statements do not clarify whether the two data sets overlap or are separate, so that's interesting.
Well, the cases made public so far have primarily involved supporters of Samvel Karapetyan's Strong Armenia Party. In one of the wiretapped recordings released by the Anti-Corruption Committee, one of the participants claimed that Moscow had said that even if Pashinyan were to be re-elected, he would be overthrown in a coup.
Lovely. And today Reuters published a piece about how they're going to be trying to bring 100,000 people or whatever, Russian Armenians. They're going to help. We've been hearing
Well,
this.
800 people were mentioned as people who would make that coup happen.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're talking about the coup.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. I guess there's 800 people are ready to to get involved in a coup. And then, yeah, about 100,000 Armenians from Russia being brought to Armenia to vote in the elections, because for those who don't know, if you're an Armenian citizen living abroad, you don't have the ability to go to a nearby embassy and vote. So you have to physically be here. As always, talking about the articles we published this week. And yesterday we published one, I think, Rubina, that we know for sure that made you and me cry as we were translating and editing. It was, it never leaves you. So I just want to thank Varinag Ghazarian, the photo journalist who put this story together. It's called Tracing Memory, Unfinished Conversations of War. And I know that I'm tired of hearing this too, that, we're tired of hearing about the war. We don't want to talk about the war. But there are so many lives that are still being lived suspended because of the war, and we can't not talk about them. And he talks to a number of veterans, and the questions were so great. He asked all of them the same question: what changed for you? How do you feel? What was your happiest day? What was the thing that you liked the
taste
tasted the most?
You, the smell.
Yeah, smell. What do you think about peace? What do you think about loss? What do you think about victory? Really, I really hope a lot of people spend a little bit of time with it.
You feel how superficial you are compared to these veterans who kind of have a completely different outlook, and not to say that they don't have their disappointments and their pain is substantial, but their outlook and their understanding of what peace is and what a defeat was and what life is and what they feel walking in Yerevan, and this little windows open into their experiences during the war, and what's the most difficult thing for them today
as they walk through the city.
Yes, really makes a lot of the conversations we have, a lot of the narratives we hear on
Everything
social
we-
media
yeah.
sound very superficial
Yeah.
and uninformed.
Yeah, sort of off topic, but on topic. After the war, I had students at AUA who had served during the war, and also those young men who had served in the army before the war. Their perspective was always much more rational and while being emotional, but also very realistic. It was amazing. It's like we need to learn from what they're living today. So we need to read it. We need to sort of confront the pain.
We
yeah.
need to ask.
Yeah, somebody
To
has to
begin, yeah.
ask, indeed.
Well, as I mentioned before, we did publish a piece that looks into the May 28th parade, What's New in Armenia's Arsenal. It's by Hovannes Nazaretian. He was there taking photos,
Pictures,
comparing,
making notes.
making notes, and the information is laid out in our Newswatch section. It's still on our front page as
Yep.
well when you're listening to this, hopefully. And so if you want to know more about what was new and what was Armenian, it's all there.
And this piece again, Maria Gunko, if you're listening, thank you. It's called Ani, Where Khachkar's Lie Face Down in the Dust. So she went to Western Armenia, which is now Eastern Turkey, and she went to all the places that many Armenians have not been to. And I think that I always say that every Armenian has to go and to see what was lost. Yeah. But she goes to the medieval Armenian capital, Ani, which is known as the city of 1001 churches, which is now right across the Arax River. You can see it from Armenia. So she looks at memory erasure, cultural survival. She reflects on heritage, identity, historical loss, and the politics of preserving and silencing the past, and how those khachkars, which are stone crosses, which are very, very Armenian pieces of cultural heritage, they've been placed on the ground with the cross facing the ground. So it was an excellent piece.
And we launched Salt, our lifestyle magazine, this week, and still ongoing. We still have several articles we haven't shared yet because we need it.
Yes.
This is why Salt is there. Is sometimes some reading that is not politics, that is not negative, that is, just
uplifting too.
Uplifting, yes. Well, one of the articles, the first one we published, is called The Sound of Post-Soviet Armenia and the Grunge Era of Rabis. It's by Tamara Khachaturian. It's not so much about Rabis, though, but she takes a look at the role music played during the cold and dark years, early years in Armenia. But she's talking specifically about Yerevan, about how different genres of music were activated to serve the public and were uplifting at a time where there was no electricity, food was scarce, but, the Philharmonic was playing,
Giving
concerts,
free concerts, yeah.
And, the pop genre, the pop music was also artists were giving free performances, and there was something for everyone. And it was during this time that also the Rabis took off, which also kind of served its own public.
Sure, indeed. It was an interesting piece. The next one we had was about bridal fashion in Armenia through history by Nora Grigorian, and she traces that fashion from traditional daras to contemporary couture, and how the wedding dress reflects identity and family expectations, cultural change. Before, Armenian women used to wear red dresses because it was seen as a sign of fertility and femininity, and now a lot of women are trying to incorporate Armenian designs into their bridal dress gown. So she talks to designers and historians and examines the tension between heritage, modernity, and self-expression.
And the modern bride.
And the modern bride.
Who's also trying to navigate
all of this.
And short uplifting story about squash.
I used to play squash in Canada. Piece of useless information.
Well, it's titled Squash Finds Its Footing in Armenia. It's by Sona Gevorkian, and she's talking about exactly that, how it's kind of taking off in Armenia, and now that it's going to be featured in the Olympics, how Armenia is starting right at time and might actually have a chance.
Yeah, we talked about the recent competition. So like you said, short uplifting piece. And the final one is about Varujan Muradian, the man who brought the vines back, and it's by Tikran Seferian, first-time writer for us. It's about Varujan's life, how living in the cold and dark years of the Soviet Union, Soviet Armenia, then goes to LA. He's an accountant, and then he falls in love with wine and comes back in the 2008 or 2009. And, it's about he leaving behind a successful life in LA to plant vines in our very volcanic soil and help reshape Armenia's relationship with wine. So that was a cool story as well.
We do have a podcast this week.
Yes, we do.
It's called The Limits of Misinformation, and I had two guests from France. One is a researcher at the Sorbonne, and the other one is the director of Fake Off, a French organization dedicated to media literacy. And they weren't very well informed about the particular situation in Armenia right now, but they have extensive experience dealing with misinformation and voter behavior. And it's interesting what they had to say. And it basically says misinformation does not affect the voter behavior as much as we think.
Right.
It just polarizes people who already had found themselves in that bubble, and they become more polarized.
Right.
But there's no direct proven link that misinformation can sway election results.
I think we just collectively have to get off social media.
Or
Seriously.
become less emotional.
Yeah, or become less emotional. Speaking of emotional, this week we are publishing our fourth and final poll. We're going to be doing a public presentation by invitation only, and so we'll be publishing it this coming Thursday night, so just 3 days before Election Day. And so that's going to be interesting, and we'll tell you more about what we're going to be doing on Election Day next week during our podcast before the elections. So have a safe and peaceful weekend, and we will be back again next week.